Andy's plane slowly gained more height and more speed, and I watched Andy fiddle with the dials and fiddle with the trim wheel that was between him and me as he sorted the plane steady. He pointed out the horizon to me, the little bubble that just made sure that the plane was flying in a straight line, and he said this over the over the intercom with me and him, and then he settled back, hit a couple of buttons on a GPS, and then just basically set the plane on autopilot. I was amazed at the view from Andy's plane. We had a good 180 vision. We also had glass panels in the ceiling, and we could see everything. The cloudless sky, the endless blue. Andy banked and turned and then headed north, and we flew over the lagoon, and we flew over the mangroves. You know, we flew over the middle of the island, and then slowly banked out towards the edge over the township. And the reef, we could see the white line of the reef as the waves crested over the reef, the deep blue as it went further and further out. All the little dive boats parked up at the various dive sites, and you know, I kind of turned my head to see if I could, you know, look back and see Dave's house. And I was maybe catch a glimpse of him just like looking up or waving or something, you know. My heart felt very heavy, but a new chapter in my life for a short while was going to begin, and I had to put my emotional feelings in a place that I called File 13. And File 13 was a filing cabinet inside my head, where I took all the bad shit and I punched it into a ball, and I put that ball in a drawer, and I pushed that drawer back into the filing cabinet, and I locked that filing cabinet, and that's where all my emotions and everything that had happened in my life were kept. And that's what I tried to do, focus outside. Andy pointed, you know, things out to me. You know, he pointed this out and he pointed that out, you know. And Andy's voice was quite calming, to be quite honest. I had never heard Andy, like when he was down on the island, say a bad thing about anybody or raise his voice about anything. Even when people owed him money and they didn't pay him, Andy never slagged anybody off, and he never cussed anybody out. And you know, he just gently reminded them that it was money that they owed, and if they didn't pay it, then they didn't get any more scuba gear. Because as far as I knew, Andy was the only scuba rep that was down there. If you went up to the States and you brought your own gear in, you paid 40% of a surcharge, and then the corrupt officials at the airport would pull you to one side and demand more money from you. So Andy had a deal going with those guys where they got 20%, and then he gave them 10% for themselves. So it went smoothly. So he saved himself quite a bit of money because he brought quite a lot of gear in. And yeah, so the island opened up. I think the maximum speed on Andy's plane was about 270 miles an hour, and then compared to a jet, commercial jet, that was nothing. But Andy's plane was a bit smoother. It didn't bump as much. And I just looked out, and you know, my heart was heavy. It was sinking because, you know, I was leaving the island, and I was going up to something that I was uncertain about, but I needed to do something else. I needed to get a break away, and for a while at least, and just, you know, calm my head and calm myself, and and experience different things. And so it had been, you know, almost 2 years, you know, in San Pedro for me, and just the amount of bullshit that had been slapped on you know, on everybody's shoulders over that period of time, you know, was a very, very heavy feeling. And if I had stayed down there, I probably would have ended up in jail for possibly taking somebody's life, and it wasn't a situation I wanted to get myself into. So I continued to look out and enjoy the view. It was absolutely spectacular. You could see the horizon, and we kept on the very edge of the beach, flying north over San Pedro, then went over the river cut up north, more up north, where it was just mostly trees and little houses and more dive shops and restaurants that were sparsely, next to each other. It was absolutely beautiful, and in a way it was quite sad to see the island begin to be taken over, by people, building more houses and stuff. But that's just the way that progress was. All of a sudden Andy kind of clicked in, and he said to me, he says, put your feet on the pedals, on the rudders, left and right. And I said, why? And he goes, put your feet on them, he says, and get a feel of, he says, of what it's like, he says, to basically, almost fly a plane. So I put my feet in the rudders. And he said, if you press the right rudder, he goes, you'll bank slowly to the right, he says, and if you press the left, you'll bank slowly to the left. He says, we're on autopilot. He says, you can't really do anything wrong. He says, once you let go, he says, the autopilot will take over and the plane will fly. And I said, okay. And he said to me, I'm going to go to sleep. He says, if we see any big clouds, which there wasn't any, he said, if you see any big dark clouds, he goes, don't let the plane fly through them. He says, fly around them. He says, either bank left, he goes, or bank right. He says, and once you clear them, he says, take your feet off the rudders, he goes, and and the plane will fly again. He says, we're okay. He says, wake me up in about 2 hours. I kind of looked at him. He took his headset off. He put it over the yoke, and folded his arms and put his head back, and within about 10 minutes he was snoring. I set my dive watch for 2 hours, and because the way that I was just Google-eyed on everything, I probably would have forgot to wake him. So the whole flying time up to Miami was going to be 4 hours. And he just says to me, look, he says, if you need to pee, he says, or, whatever else, he goes, just climb over the back, he says, and, use the toilet, he says, and, don't worry about waking me. He says, just do what you need to do. And I was like, I don't want to fucking take a dump in an aircraft this small, because fucking it'd be smelling like a sewage. So, if I needed to pee, then the pee was okay, but I wasn't going to do anything else. I didn't fancy sitting in a small, confined, hot cabin. No thanks. So when Andy fell asleep, and I was looking up, looking for traffic and stuff, and looking down, at the reef, and, and trying to deal with, the sadness, that I was, leaving Dave, because it played very heavily on me. And I just said to myself, fuck it, Cole. You made a decision, live with it for now. Fuck, if you don't like Miami, or you don't like what Andy's doing, you can always go back down again. It's always going to be there. My job's always going to be there. So I sat back, everything went into file 13, and I just resigned myself now to, going up to the States and starting something new. And little did I realise, with Andy telling me to put my feet on the pedals of the aircraft and feel it, to feel, the aircraft, how you could guide it and how smooth everything was. I didn't really realise that that was Andy basically introducing me to flying and getting my PPL, my private pilot license, 6 months down the line. So so that was another big surprise that Andy was going to lay on me, and things were going to take a turn for the best as well. So Andy fell asleep. I sat back in silence, and just enjoyed the view. There wasn't really much else to do. It was just cruising. We cruised at I would think about 9,000 feet. The island got smaller and smaller, but the view got bigger and bigger. And then before we knew it, we were at the end of the island, which was about 36 miles long. And there was a river that was cut between Mexico and Belize during the Maya times, back in history. And because of the warring tribes back then, apparently, the Maya cut a river through and basically dislocated Ambergris Key from the mainland Mexico, and that's how Ambergris Key became Ambergris Key, basically. So before we knew it, we were up the coast of on Mexico. Again, the reef stretched up, the water was as deep. We passed a place called Boca Bacala Chico, which was another big atoll as we were coming in. and it was absolutely beautiful, and there was some boats at it. I didn't know what type of attractions or, you know, were up this length of the coast, but I knew that lots of the bigger boats from San Pedro would go up there for the day trips or overnight trips. The reef stretched all the way up as far as Mexico, and you know, the diving was going to be spectacular. I just didn't have the pleasure to go up that far and see what it was all about.